Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisa Baselt, and I am the Chief Learning Officer at the Canadian Physiotherapy Association. I will be moderating today's session. Today, we'll be discussing the current state with COVID-19 employment law. You will hear a brief statement from Gowling WLG on this topic. Following that, I will be asking our representative from Gowling questions that we have received from our members over the past several days. Please note we will not be taking questions live from attendees during this webinar. However, at the end of the session, I will share more information on who to contact with additional questions. In addition, we will be recording today's webinar, and it will be made available on CPA's channels. I would now like to introduce our speaker. Neena Gupta is a partner at Gowling's Waterloo Region and Toronto offices. Her practice focuses on a broad range of employment and human rights matters. Neena has advised a wide array of employers, from startups to world-renowned multinationals, on all aspects of employment law, including employment policies, offer letters, compensation plans, cross-border employment, and regulatory compliance in Canada. Neena regularly advises employers on both compliance and litigation involving the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Canada Labour Code, the Canadian Human Rights Act, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and the Employment Standards Act. When she's not working in the office, she's usually helping her teenage son with her favorite four-legged grandson, a 1,300-pound horse, shoveling manure and calming the horse down. Great skills for her day job, she says. I will now turn the session over to Neena to share a bit about what she is seeing with regards to COVID-19.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. I also want to let you know that while I practice in Ontario, I'm being joined today by my partner, Will Cascadden, who is called to bars in Alberta and BC, and he's promised that if I get something wrong for those jurisdictions, he'll let me know and rescue me, as it were. I want to acknowledge that this week has probably been unprecedented for all of us. I think we were all watching with concern about COVID-19 in China and in Italy, but I don't know that the reality of having to shut down the way we have had to shut down this week had actually been something that most of us thought about. So it's unprecedented. And because it's unprecedented, things are changing in real time. We, in this month, put out 42 bulletins. 32 bulletins were this week alone. So it gives you a sense of just how things are changing in so many different areas. And so as a lawyer, I have to give you two warnings. One is this is not intended to be legal advice. If you're going to be doing something, you should really be talking to your own lawyer or reaching out to one of the lawyers at Gowling's for specific advice. And secondly, things are changing in real time. And so what was an accurate answer yesterday or the day before may not be an accurate answer the end of the day today or Monday. And so that's just the reality of what we face. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit at the beginning, if that's okay, Elisa, about just some of the things that might impact physiotherapists. And we had the benefit of a chat earlier this morning about sort of where physiotherapists work. And in my mind, physiotherapists often work as self-employed professionals or in small clinic settings, some of whom are owners of clinics and some are employees or joint venture partners, kind of in a quasi-ownership or fee split basis. And then another group who are truly employees, whether of larger or smaller institutions. And so what I'm going to say is going to impact each of you differently depending on where you fit. Now, most of you have been probably watching CBC or some other news feed, and you're aware that the government has announced some pretty significant assistance for businesses. I'm not going to pretend or suggest that that's going to be nearly enough to actually cover all of the losses each of these businesses are going to experience. And that includes your businesses and mine. I think it's really intended almost like life support for those businesses to give them a chance to survive until the economy picks up. So a couple of things that you need to know if you're a small business is that there will be, or it's proposed, that there will be a temporary wage subsidy to small businesses for a period of 3 months. And that will be 10% of the remuneration paid during that period, up to a maximum of $1,375 per employee and $25,000 per employer. And essentially, I think most of this is going to be done by reducing the tax remittances that business owners have to send on a regular basis. That would apply for many of your businesses, which would fall within the exception of small business. I also, although it may seem like this is for bigger businesses, the Business Credit Availability Program of BDC, Business Development Bank of Canada, and Export Development Canada, which will not apply to you, they have essentially advised that there will be various kinds of credit solutions for small businesses. And the recommendation that practically I would make is you go talk to your own bankers, your own lenders about the situation and start working with them with respect to how am I going to survive in the next X number of months. And we don't know if it's going to be 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 months. So we just don't know how long this is going to be. So you need to have a good relationship with your banker. And what I've been told off the record is that the bank industry has been told you need to be part of the solution. And they're making all those noises about, well, we are going to be understanding if people have to miss mortgage payments on their personal homes. So you're hearing already that the banking industry understands that it needs to be part of the solution. So that is really kind of the update from a business owner perspective. I've spoken to various MPs and other members of the government, and all of them recognize that this is still a work in progress. You should also be aware that Parliament is being recalled, and none of these things will be operationalized per se, or many of these things won't be operationalized until there's legislation passed. I don't anticipate the legislation will not be passed, but there's a process involved and Parliament has to be recalled. So I think that was sort of one of the things I wanted to talk about. The other thing I wanted to talk about is many of you are self-employed, and being self-employed means that you have not been paying into the EI system. There is talk about 2 kinds of support that will be extended to self-employed people or independent contractors. That is emergency care benefits. So if you are quarantined or have to take care of somebody, either a child or an elderly person or someone who has COVID-19, there are certain benefits that will be available to you. And I think it's $900 biweekly. And then there's also some talk about enacting emergency income support for self-employed people, again at that $900 per biweekly. And yes, it is not a lot of money, but you also have to look at people who've paid into the system. They're maxing out in the $1,150 range. So I think the logic was if you paid into the system, you should probably get a bit more. But again, beginning of April, we will have much more clarity about these programs. I don't know, Elise, if there was anything else you wanted me to cover as a preliminary remark, or if that's helpful as a context setting, and then I'm happy to take questions. Or, as you know, lawyers can talk forever, and I've got lots of materials to go through, so I'm not sure what else you would like me to do at the beginning.
Thank you, Nina. No, that was, I think, great as a little bit of an overview and sharing with everyone how quickly everything is changing and how quickly everyone is working. So I'm going to kind of dive into some of the questions that we've received from members.
Sure.
A question here: what should I do about my clinic? Should I temporarily lay off clinic staff in this pandemic? How would I go about doing that? What are they entitled to?
Okay, so that's a question we're getting asked a lot, and the short answer, it depends on two things. One is what province you're in, and also it depends on what your contracts, if you have written contracts with your employees or not. So in Quebec, if you have any Quebec members, the law recognizes that layoffs are essentially part of management obligations to decide. And so there's a little bit of latitude given in Quebec about layoffs. In the rest of the common law, or English-speaking provinces, if you will, the law is much more difficult. And in fact, a layoff is treated often as a kind of quasi-dismissal. We call it constructive dismissal, entitling people theoretically to go to court, say, this is, I've been dismissed and I deserve all my rights as if I were dismissed. We at Gowlings generally believe that the courts will recognize that COVID-19 is an unprecedented situation. And I've been talking to lawyers, and we've been actually thinking about going back to case law from World War II, 1939 to 1945. The vast majority of people who are on this call were not alive then. So, that will give you a sense that this is generationally unprecedented. And we are cautiously optimistic that courts will recognize that layoffs in these circumstances are not effectively walking away from the employment agreement. So before you do anything, you should probably have a quick call to your own employment lawyer or your own business lawyer. But the provinces in general, and we have a chart that we're updating in real time, but the provinces in general are creating various kinds of statutorily protected leave. So if you lay off, in almost all the provinces, you do it in writing. That's one thing that's common. You try, if you can, to say, well, a tentative recall date. You don't know, you put in saying, well, I'm going to get in touch with you by such and such a date, and we'll talk again. You do expressly talk about it being part of the COVID-19 response. In some cases, from a safety perspective, you may feel it's not safe for my employees to continue to render physiotherapy services. I have another health professional who deals with elderly patients, and so they're being very careful about what they can and cannot do. So you sort of do all of that, and you cross your fingers and hope that you're not going to get slammed with a lawsuit. Not very realistic or not very reassuring legal advice, I suppose. And the other thing you do from a practical basis is you keep in touch with people. Now, understand that many of the layoffs, or you might also want to think about whether it's really a layoff or is it a kind of leave. And what do I mean? Because both of them are unpaid. But in many cases, people are going to come to you and say, I have to take care of my kids because they're not going to school. The daycares are now shut down, at least in Waterloo region where I work. Schools are shut down. I can't come to work. In those cases, you may actually be able to use a leave, one of the newly enacted leaves in your province. The advantage of using a leave is that the case law tends to treat leaves as being temporary and to the benefit of both the employer and the employee, so you have less, it doesn't reduce it to zero, but less of a risk of constructive dismissal. So if somebody needs to leave because of, I have to be in self-isolation, I might have COVID-19, or I have a cough, and God knows whether that cough is COVID-19, but I have to, monitor and be away. I have childcare responsibilities, elder care responsibilities. Those may be covered under one of the new leaves that are being enacted. So Ontario for sure, and I'll get Will to pipe in if he feels comfortable doing that, or maybe he can send me an email as to whether Alberta has passed its legislation, are trying to create leaves to deal with those unique circumstances. So that wouldn't be a layoff, that would be a leave. And then other cases, it might simply be, I don't have work for you. Everyone's canceling because they're concerned or in quarantine. So it may well be a true layoff. But I guess the things you can take away, do it in writing. make sure you refer to COVID-19. Don't forget that record of employment that you have to issue, because people may be able to claim EI benefits. For those of your people that are self-employed, you may want to do the letter now, and then as soon as the legislation is updated in early April, you may have to go back and fill out some more forms so they can take advantage of some of these government programs. I don't know. I'm sorry it's such a vague answer, but there's so many moving parts right now. I think that's the best we can do right now, generically.
Thank you, Nina. Switching gears a little bit, so one of the questions that we're getting is, if I check in on a patient while off from work and do not charge, will this endanger my potential entitlement to EI?
So a couple of things about this. To be entitled to EI right now, remember the changes Trudeau announced a couple of days ago are not yet law. You have to be an employee, and you have to be earning income, and like employment income. So let's assume you're one of those physiotherapists that is an employee and has been put on layoff or leave, and you have a record of employment and you're collecting EI. Right? So that's kind of the scenario. And you do a quick check on an employee, maybe on a patient, just by phone or maybe by Zoom, like we're talking today, but you don't get paid for that. I cannot imagine how that's going to undermine your EI entitlement, because what undermines your EI entitlement is when you're working and getting paid. And I don't think I think that there'll be some understanding. Some of you have very vulnerable and very elderly patients, and just even a friendly phone call saying, I know my dad's physiotherapist, he's passed away, would phone sometimes, say, Dr. Gupta, just reminding you to do your exercises. It's a nice day. Just something like that. You need that human contact. The elderly in our population are feeling very isolated. I can't imagine that any EI officer is going to disentitle you from EI for that.
Okay, thank you. Still with regards to EI, so the question is, can I perform telehealth and charge and receive a partial EI payment?
Now that's a much more complicated issue. Now, why is that complicated? First of all, part of this question leads me to question whether the person is truly an employee, which is what you get EI for, or self-employed. And right now, you would not be getting EI, you'd be getting this emergency support benefit. And we haven't seen the full contours of the support benefit. Now, there is something employers can do, which is called the Supplemental Unemployment Benefit Plan, called a sub plan. And in the good old days, we used to use sub plans for things like maternity leave top-ups or paternity leave top-ups, sick leave top-ups. And you know what? We stopped using it. It started getting expensive, or third-party insurance was what we went to. There's been a call to use subs to top up people who are doing COVID-19. And so in other words, you'll get your EI payment and the employer will top you up. And the other thing that's been suggested is work sharing. In other words, telehealth is not going to be a full load. Let's be blunt about it, especially not for physiotherapists. So in other words, maybe you can do half your work by telehealth, and for the other half, you might get EI or government benefit. So maybe we need to mark that question down as one which, when the government clarifies some of their rules about subs and emergency support benefits, we can perhaps come back to the audience and say we have some more clarity about how that will work.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. The next question is around the status of independent contractors in relation to benefits or any of the announced government support.
So that's a great question, because many of you are self-employed. So right now, as of this minute, you are not qualified for EI, but I anticipate that in late March or early April, that emergency support benefit that Prime Minister Trudeau announced, I believe, Wednesday morning, the whole week has been a bit of a blur, will apply to you, and that will be what you end up claiming.
Okay, thank you. The last question that we have is going down the vein of occupational health and safety. So the question is, can an employer ask a physiotherapist to work in an emergent situation without the proper protective equipment?
So every province will have a slightly different answer, but typically for physiotherapists, unless they're working in what I would call a healthcare institution, so I mean hospitals, sanatoriums, long-term care, typically any employee has the right to refuse unsafe work. And physiotherapists, with all due respect, are not ICU nurses where, maybe there's a different sort of dynamic there. I find it really hard. I can see it being important for physiotherapists to do work, but not life-threatening if they don't. So I think they have generally a right to refuse work, except if they're working in one of those institutions. Having said that, if they're working in one of those institutions, there still should be joint health and safety, a union rep, a health and safety officer to whom, you deal with the dying patient, because that's what you're talking about. Somebody who's going to be permanently compromised or dying. We're not talking chronic. We're talking really, what a true emergency is. But the physiotherapist should be going to talk to the appropriate health and safety officer saying, I'm not comfortable rendering services without like an N95 mask or proper face masks or proper goggles or proper gowns. And this is why, quite frankly, hospitals are going to a only emergency care model and canceling elective surgeries. And elective doesn't mean unimportant. It just means a lot, we can wait because they don't want to put anybody in those cases. We know masks are in short supply. We know proper gowns are in short supply.
Okay, thank you. So those are all the questions that we have for today. So I'm now going to bring the session to a close. I would like to say that if you do have specific questions for Gowling, please call their hotline at 1-888-943-0953. That's 1-888-943-0953. You can also reach the CPA at information@physiotherapy.ca. Finally, please continue to check out the CPA's COVID-19 resource page at physiotherapy.ca/COVID-19 for the latest information on COVID-19 and future webinars. I'd like to take this final moment to sincerely thank Nina for participating today. I hope each of you listening found value in this session and can make use of this information during these trying times. Thank you and have a good day.